All right, so it is time for us to give a rundown on some of our national and international stories for this Thursday, June 8th, 2017. And as always, we have more stories than we have time for in a video segment. If you'd like to get 30 to 40 minutes of news delivered to your inbox by audio form every single morning at 5 a.m., then become a subscriber at radiofreespeech.com. Well, let's dive in and take a look at some of the news. There was a terror attack in Iran. This is actually the first time that this has happened. The gunmen attacked the parliament and the shrine to the old Ayatollah Khomeini. 12 people dead. World reaction, of course, condemning the terrorism and vowing to work with Iran against terror, which is kind of interesting given Iran's propensity toward funding terror, which is the whole thing that got the UAE on the bad side of the Gulf states. As you recall, Saudi Arabia condemning UAE for funding extremism and shutting down their flights and pulling back their diplomacy and all of this other stuff. Now, in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, they are threatening their own people, threatening sympathizers with prison if they support Qatar. Speaking of Qatar, now there's been another story coming out. There's another one from CNN where it's anonymous sources within the CIA saying that it was a Russian hacker who hacked into the Qatar news agency and planted the stories. One can almost expect this to happen, basically. Now everything is the fault of a Russian hacker, I suppose. Hey, look, we had a power outage in Fairbanks, Alaska. It must have been a Russian hacker, right? President Trump has nominated lawyer Christopher Wray to lead the FBI. He, by the way, was working as a DA or some such prosecutor, I believe, under the Bush administration back in the day. A nursery worker in London on her way to work, followed by 3 women who were shouting something about Allah. They attacked her and cut her arm from wrist to elbow. The woman was taken to the hospital. Police are not treating it as a terror attack. Not. Speaking of terror attacks, the death toll from the London Bridge attack has now risen to 8. They found another body in the Thames. And they've confirmed, the family of Ignacio Echeverria has confirmed that he is dead. He's the so-called skateboard hero. I don't know if you heard about that story. He saw a woman being stabbed. He rushed over with his skateboard to defend her, and he was killed by one of the terrorists. There was a deafening blast in the Somali capital. Not sure how big, how many dead or whatnot, but once again, Mogadishu is still under siege as their government is basically fighting itself. The U.S. intelligence chief, former, testified to Congress that he never felt pressured by Trump. We'll let that lie for there. Another plane has gone missing from Myanmar. In this particular case, 120 people, mostly military, they have found wreckage in the ocean. The woman, who is now 20 years old, on trial for texts that she sent driving her boyfriend to suicide back when she was 17 years old. And it looks like at this point, the trial continues. They actually showed the texts up on the video showing basically her talking him into suicide every step of the way. In Toronto, police were caught on video mocking a woman with Down syndrome. She says that she doesn't want them fired. She just wants a public apology. Russia is now looking at an anti-missile umbrella to be created over their entire territory, very similar to the missile defense system that the United States has. And it looks like a new U.S. priority that is coming to fruition, the idea of economic war against Russia. By the end of the week here, we're looking at the possibility of the Congress reinstating more sanctions against Russia, continuing to boil up with this whole idea of the accusations that Russia somehow interfered with our election. If these sanctions continue, it's going to start now. They're looking at going against not just some of the political people, but against the economic interests of Russia as well. And this could bode very ill for future relations. Last thing, speaking of relations with the Russians, Vladimir Putin, in another one of the interviews that's going to set to air next week on Showtime, he said he doesn't have bad days because he's not a woman. I'll just leave that hang right there and let you think about that. As I remind you that if you want more news, go to radiofreespeech.com and become a subscriber.